Shall I start, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
Respected guest speaker, principal, vice principal, dear faculties, and my beloved students, greetings to each one of you present here. I'm extremely overwhelmed to get this opportunity to welcome you all for this magnificent one-day webinar. Healthcare agencies around the globe are consistently faced with the challenges of providing high-quality care to those in need. 2020, the International Year of the Nurse, really has been a year like no other. Ironically, thanks to the novel coronavirus, nurses globally have been asked to put down their party poppers and don their face masks to help firefight during the pandemic.
Your voice is very low, Jayanti. Excuse me, sorry.
Yes,
It is very feeble, I think.
ma'am, once again, I'm sorry.
Yes. வால்யூம் இவ்வளவுதானா சவுண்டே கேட்கல ஓகே இதுல வச்சிட்டேன் ஃபுல்லா வச்சிட்டேன் இல்ல பண்ணா நான் தான் அப்புறம் பண்ண கேட்கலன்னு சொன்னேன் ரொம்ப ஃபீபிளா இருக்கு எஸ் எஸ் ஜெயந்தி ப்ளீஸ்.
This international emergency has substantially burdened intensive care units worldwide, and as a result, the exponential increase in demand for ICU trained nurses has meant that many healthcare professionals, including advanced nursing practitioners, face emergency redeployment from their usual roles, thus provoking a huge amount of anxiety and work-related stress. Keeping the importance of acquiring advanced nursing practices skills, the Department of Medical Surgical Nursing have arranged webinar on advanced nursing practices in the context of COVID-19. Sorry. Better than 1,000 days of diligent study is one day with a great teacher. The above said quote was very much apt for our guest speaker. Yes, I am proudly delighted to take an opportunity to introduce the guest speaker for the day, Dr. Jhansi Rani Natarajan, Lecturer, College of Nursing, Sultan Qaboos University, Muscat, Oman. We are grateful to her for accepting our invitation and becoming a guest speaker of today's event. She has known high achievements of the institution she is in charge of. Ma'am has completed her BSc Nursing in Christian Medical College, Vellore, MSc Nursing in M.A. Chidambaram College of Nursing, Chennai, and PhD in University of South Africa. She served our nursing profession both in teaching and clinical practice at various levels, molded the life of students, and served people with her kindness in our India for more than 20 years. And then she has captured the position as a lecturer in College of Nursing, Sultan Qaboos University, Muscat, Oman. Our Excellency has innate talent in handling students by effectively conveying nursing concepts and procedures in laboratory and clinical settings. She is very much committed to incorporate knowledge gathered from ongoing research and expertise in simulation training, integration of technology. Ma'am has membership in various professional bodies, and she has attended many international conferences and presented many papers. She has published more than 10 articles in peer-reviewed journals. She has been involved in research projects related to quality of life in chronic illness. We are truly raptured with your presence. On behalf of College of Nursing, we welcome you, ma'am. Next, I warmly and respectfully welcome our beloved principal, Dr. Padmavati R., who has been the pillar behind this event. We welcome you, ma'am. My genial welcome to our Vice Principal, Professor A. Chitra, and all the department HODs, faculties, guest invitees from various institutions. It's always a pleasure to be able to address the young minds. Yes, I welcome my dear students to this webinar who have gathered here to add radiance to this occasion. Once again, I welcome you all. Now, without consuming any time, we request the honorable guest speaker to address the gathering and cast the light of her knowledge of Be Like Her one day. We welcome you, ma'am, once again, and over to you. Thank you.
Good morning to one and all present here. Thank you for that wonderful invitation. I'm indeed proud to be her teacher. And nice to see Principal Ma'am and the Vice Principal Ma'am, who is my friend. And it's a real great privilege for me. I really want to thank the management, Principal Ma'am, Vice Principal, Ms. Jayanti, and all the faculty who have given me this opportunity. And can I share my screen?
எஸ் மேம், எஸ் மேம். ஏஞ்சல் அதை கொடுத்துருங்க.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It says it's disabled.
Yes, ma'am. Now you can.
Yeah. Is it clear, Angel?
எஸ் மேம், இட் இஸ் கிளியர்.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you once again. I especially thank the students who will be my audience for today. As you all know, currently I'm working in Sultan Qaboos University in Muscat. Earlier I was there in Chennai, working in MSAJ College of Nursing for a longer time. So I know about our setup and everything. And I'm happy to be presenting my topic today on advanced practices in the times of COVID. And this will be my presentation, content of my presentation. We'll go through introduction, pathophysiology, management, and nursing care. As usual, I say a word to all the nursing students whenever I take even classes. Maybe Jayanti would have heard it many times, that nursing is nothing but proper usage of our head, hands, and heart. Three H, which I always believe, and I want to pass it on to my students also. Whatever we do, let us have the strength of the knowledge in our head and the positive attitude which we have, which is therapeutic for healing our patients in our heart. And the best skill we are training you for that only, the best skill which should be there in our hands. And all these three can take us to greater levels if we are truthful to that. And my presentation also is based on those things. Let us have some knowledge about this coronavirus, and let us see what should be our attitude towards taking care of them. Let us see the skills or the nursing management skills which we need to have in taking care of these patients. As we all know, it is a disease, coronavirus or COVID-19 we call it, is the disease which is caused by the novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. SARS is nothing but severe acute respiratory distress syndrome. We have come across few of these earlier also, but this novel coronavirus is the very severe one which is causing a lot of havoc all around the world. The first case was reported in China in December 2019, and the cases became more worldwide, and also deaths have been reported. So WHO announced it as a pandemic in March 2020. And as of June 15, or maybe the recent data says, almost 17.5 crores of people are affected worldwide, and 38 lakhs of people have died so far. And in India, the total cases are around 2.9 crores, and the death is around 3 to 4 lakhs. So we can understand the intensity of the disease and the importance of, or we can call it as need of our topic, so that we'll be oriented about the problem and the care. First, we'll go through the structure of the coronavirus, which is very important for us to understand the pathophysiology. As we all know, this virus has an envelope which is surrounding the RNA material, and this envelope is made up of lipid, and this usually protects the virus whenever it is away from the host cell. It does not get destroyed. And it has a peculiar spike proteins which are called S, and they look like crown all around the virus. That's why we call it as coronavirus. And this helps in usually getting attached themselves to the host cell. We'll see about the host cell in a few minutes. And the RNA is the genetic material which is present inside the virus. Now, what is this ACE2? Angiotensin converting cells 2. They are present in alveoli, and these viruses need these receptors for getting attached to the human body, or multiplication or replication, whatever it is we need. They need ACE2 cells. And we know about angiotensin converting enzyme cells. They are useful in alveoli for producing surfactant, which is keeping the alveoli opened, and also it prevents collapse of the lungs also. So we can see how these viruses are getting, as I said, the spike protein gets attached itself to, in the air, there are a lot of organisms. So it goes through your nose or mouth, reaches the upper respiratory tract or lower respiratory tract. When it reaches the alveoli, it identifies that ACE2 cells and they get attached to it. They send their RNA. We saw that there is a RNA genetic material inside. They send it inside this host cell, and literally it is hijacking that host cell to produce millions of copies of viruses, and it gets matured and it is sent outside. So what happens, it affects the nearby alveoli cells, and also it comes out, the virus is shed outside and it is spreading to another person who's nearby also. Now, how does it transmit? We see that the incubation period is around 14 days or 2 weeks. So the infected person in coughing or sneezing or talking, the infected droplets are there in the air. Direct contact by handshaking or very close to that person, we can get it. Or the droplets are on the surface, like door handle, lift, or some articles which they are using. When we touch and when we touch our nose and mouth, it enters inside our body again. So we know this famous ways of preventing the transmission, like if anybody is affected but they are not symptomatic in the house also, we can say sleep in a separate room, use surgical masks, social distance, washing hands frequently, practicing some cough etiquette like keeping elbow crease, cleaning those surfaces, and also using all separate things for that person will help in containing the transmission. Now we'll come to something which is very important, the pathophysiology of the virus. As I have already shared, the virus enters the alveolar cells, ACE2 cells. So it goes there, it destroys that cell. So when something is destroyed in our body, inside the alveoli itself, we have macrophages. And there is a lot of neutrophils which are coming close to that. And there is a cytokine storm, they say. The amount of immune reaction which is happening in your body is enormous in this condition because they want to fight with that virus. In this fight, sometimes the host wins, and these people are the ones who are just showing few symptoms and they become normal. But some people go through a lot of difficulties. Sometimes this alveoli can rupture. We can see in the picture there is inflamed alveolar cells. And right side, you can see that the alveolar cells are filled with fluids. They are just completely filled with fluids because all the blood vessels which are surrounding that alveoli are permeable, and fluid is leaking out of those blood vessels and they enter the alveoli, which is already damaged. So basically the alveoli are filled with, it is inflamed, it is filled with water or fluid. So proper gas exchange is not taking place. This is in the lungs. So what is happening in the other parts of the body? The same cytokine storm. It is just the normal reaction of the body because of the microorganism, the immune invasion or the immune response which is happening inside our body. It can affect not only the lungs, it can affect the gastrointestinal tract because we have small number of these ACE2 cells in the intestines and also in the heart and in the kidneys. So these organs are also affected. That's why we hear patients saying diarrhea, nausea, vomiting and all that. And it can affect the brain also, causing headache, confusion, and the two important terms which are very important, anosmia and hypogeusia. Anosmia is they lose the sensation of smell, and hypogeusia is they lose the sensation of taste. And the cardiovascular system, it can cause chest tightness, palpitations, and it can even cause cardiac attacks. Heart attacks also can be there. In the liver, we see that the liver enzymes are deranged, kidneys also, the functions are deranged, and it can affect the eye, causing conjunctivitis. Now, when these organs are affected, as I said, sometimes the patient wins, and sometimes they can progress to acute respiratory distress syndrome and septic shock, multi-organ dysfunction, and it can lead to death of that person also. So these are the classification of cases. Like mild cases, mostly their clinical symptoms are mild. Maybe they have mild cough and fever. The chest X-ray is normal. Moderate cases, the patients have symptoms. The X-ray shows signs of pneumonia. And in severe cases, the respiratory rate is high, saturation is low, and you will find in CT 50% of lesions. I'll show in the next picture how does it look. Then critical cases, we say they already have gone into acute respiratory distress syndrome, and they need ventilation, mechanical ventilation. They have septic shock, and also multi-organ failure, as we saw in the previous one. Now, the literature says that 80% of the patients pass through this mild or moderate, but they become very normal. There are 20% of patients who go through the severe and critical cases. So the severe case, 15 among those 20, 15% of them go through severe cases, and 5% of them very rapidly go to the stage of critically ill. So just to summarize the clinical manifestations, these patients may have dry cough, high fever. We know the reason for all of that because alveoli are affected. There is bronchoconstriction, the gas exchange is reduced, so shortness of breath is there. And the dry cough is because of the nerve endings which are around the alveoli are affected. They stimulate cough. And fever, we know any immune invasion, which is immune response, which is taking place in the body, can cause fever. And they will have sore throat, myalgia, headache, and fatigue will be there. Chills and rigors they can have, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. All these are the clinical manifestations. And the complications, as I said, the very, very important complication is ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. They call it as now CARDS. COVID ARDS, okay? And septic shock is another problem. Acute kidney injury, multiple organ failure, and death are the results. And there is a high-risk group which can progress to critical stage or severe illness very early. That is the age above 60, and if they are smokers, if they have any known cardiovascular disease, diabetes or hypertension, people who are obese, especially their BMI is above 35, morbid obesity, and any immune deficiency syndromes they have, like a cancer patient who's on immunosuppression therapy or HIV patient, and if they have any pre-existing pulmonary diseases like COPD and all those things, they are at high risk for progressing to critical illness. Let us go through the common diagnostic tests which are done in these patients. We do real-time PCR, polymerase chain reaction, of nasal and oropharyngeal swab, and this RNA virus can be seen in these findings. And the chest X-ray is useful in the initial stages for us to know whether any signs of pneumonia is there. And CT scan as the disease is progressing to know about the lesions, how much the lungs are affected. Some people are even classifying it with scores. But the Indian government, ICMR, is saying it's not very useful now. And other tests, like to know about the function of other areas, echocardiogram, complete blood count, D-dimer test, which is very important because we see some coagulation problems are there, and procalcitonin is important. Some inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein and the lactate, the SGOT, SGPT, and also IL-6 count. All these things are very important when they are becoming, when the case is becoming severe, when they are becoming critically ill. We can see the X-ray findings here. In the early stage, you can see the arrow marks which are here, which shows the ground glass opacities in both the lungs. Bilateral diffuse ground glass opacities are seen. This is just that few alveoli are inflamed, ruptured, or it is damaged, which we see. As the disease is progressing, you will find multifocal patchy consolidations are there. The lung is no more functioning, it has become very stiff. And this stage it is called as white lung. So it has gone to that level of damage. And bronchoscopy also is helpful in this condition. They do sometimes bronchoscopy to identify, see the findings of bronchoscopy is here. Like we can see hyperemic, hyperemic mucosa, where it is red and it is inflamed. And a lot of these gelatinous secretions are present over there. Sometimes they are using bronchoscopy to find out the bleeding sites and to stop bleeding, to remove sometimes blood clot in the small microvessels, and sometimes to establish artificial airways, which is difficult in few patients. They are using bronchoscopy, and some drugs are also administered through bronchoscopy. This is the complete management protocol, which is given by ICMR. It is based on WHO and CDC guidelines, so international guideline. And this is what is followed in all the hospitals. Generally, I'll just brief this, and then we are going to see each of these aspects which are very important in our practice. So the first case, which is mild, they can be isolated in the home setting itself, and only supportive care is needed for them. Sometimes very wrongly they are started on antibiotics and corticosteroids, which is not needed. ICMR is again and again saying with evidence it is not needed for them. So what is needed for their supportive care is hydration. They need to take more fluids, antipyretics for their fever. Paracetamol is the best medicine. And antitussive for cough. They can have some cough syrups, and multivitamins. Even multivitamins have not been proved to show effective in controlling this disease or anything. Just for our satisfaction, we are taking multivitamin tablets. That's what is ICMR recommendation. And but monitoring at this stage is very, very important, because they should know to monitor their saturation or the vital signs, temperature. I think most of the public is very aware of it. They all buy one what is that, pulse oximeter or temperature thermometer at home, and everybody is monitoring their own things by themselves. So if they find anything abnormal, immediately they need to come to the hospital. And earlier in the beginning stages of COVID, we were using ivermectin and hydrochloroxide, the anti-malarial drug. They have found it to be not effective now, so it is not recommended in the current regimen. And in the moderate cases, we see that they are admitted in the ward and oxygen support is given. We'll see about the drugs in a few minutes in detail. So it is the anti-inflammatory drug and anticoagulation which is needed for them as a prophylaxis anticoagulation. And they also need continuous monitoring. What is happening at this stage, they can very easily progress to severe disease. That is ARDS, which I said, acute respiratory distress syndrome. So when they progress to that stage, they need either non-invasive ventilation or mechanical ventilation. We'll see in detail about all these things. So as I said, the drugs which are very important are antiviral drugs. Remdesivir is not useful in mild cases or severe cases. It is only in the moderate cases that we can use remdesivir, which is very useful. And also convalescent plasma. What is convalescent plasma? We take a person who was affected with COVID and has recovered and has tested, the PCR is negative now. So they wait for 2 weeks from that, and plasma of that person is removed, and antibodies are separated. These antibodies are given like a blood donation. It has to match with ABO matching and all should be done. When it is given to a person who's affected, you remember the host cell, angiotensin enzyme 2 cells. These antibodies go attach themselves with the same cell. So no more the virus can get themselves attached there. That's how it is helpful. But it was becoming very famous in between. Now nobody is actually into convalescent plasma therapy. It's very rare now. And the second important pharmacotherapy which is important is anti-inflammatory drugs. Dexamethasone, we know it is corticosteroid. Sometimes methylprednisolone is used. Prednisolone is used. Usually it's used for 10 days. And tocilizumab is an anti-IL-6 drug. So we saw that cytokines are formed in the body. When cytokines are too much in the body, that is also causing a lot of problems. It is leading to septic shock and multi-organ failure. That's why this drug to suppress that immunity. So this is also again anti-inflammatory drug. These two are used in the current regimen. And anticoagulants sometimes are used as prophylaxis, especially when they are in moderate cases. And it is used as a treatment when they go to severe form of the disease. Anticoagulants like low molecular weight heparins, like fraxiparin and enoxaparin, we know about those drugs. Or direct heparin is also given. And supplements like vitamin C, D, and zinc can be used, but they have not found it to be very effective. That is the current research finding. There is something called awake self-proning. If the patient is in moderate stage or even in the mild stages, we can teach them to have the different positions. Within 2 hours, they have to make effort to change their position for every 30 minutes. They can start with prone for 30 minutes, then they progress to left lateral, again after 30 minutes right lateral, again they can go back to prone or they can go to sitting position also. This is usually used for patients who are on non-invasive mechanical ventilation or high flow nasal oxygen in the ward or in ICU when they are conscious. When they are still not into mechanical ventilation, we can ask them to use this position changes, which is helpful in draining out the secretions. And when I talk about prone position, I'll explain more about it. I'll explain more about the use of it. And another thing, this may not be very clear, but I'll explain it to you. The patient can go into septic shock, I said. So what are the signs and symptoms we monitor when the patient is going for septic shock? We should know that the heart rate will be more, systolic BP will be very low, creatinine, lactate count will be very high, and the platelet count may go down, urine output will be less for these patients, and they will be struggling to breathe. So when we see them, immediately we have to do some measures like sending for all these blood tests, and we can even send blood cultures to identify the organism. It could be the secondary bacterial infection which is causing this problem for the patient. Immediately the patient should be started on hemodynamic stability like crystalloids. Normal saline can be started 30 ml per kg, and these patients need vasopressors sometimes like dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine drugs, so that their BP will be boosted up. This is a very common problem that they go into hypertension, and it's very difficult to revive these patients. Many of these patients can proceed to death at this stage. So it is very important for nurses to monitor these patients at this stage. Okay, so far we are talking about something very important, like we are mainly concentrating on the pathophysiology and the mechanisms which are taking place inside the lungs and the other organs and all that. Now we'll concentrate more about the management of critically ill COVID patient, a patient who will be admitted in ICU, how he progresses to ICU, what are all the management modalities we are doing there, what is the advanced practice which is practiced over there. I'll go on to that from this slide onwards. Okay, just to give you an idea of oxygen therapy, you can see that the step 1 and step 2, the patient is in the ward and the patient is started on nasal cannula, which is low flow oxygen, and non-breather remask, which is little higher. Oh, nasal cannula can go up to nasal cannula or simple mask also we can use here. I'll show you in the next slide about these details. And up to 6 liters or 10 liters in simple mask we can go. And as you know, non-rebreather mask we can go up to 15 liters of oxygen. Then the step 3, it is the non-invasive ventilation. It can be CPAP or BiPAP, which the patient is connected to. And sometimes they proceed to the 4th step of invasive mechanical ventilation. And the last stage, it is ECMO. It is extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. So these are the escalation procedure. We go step by step and we can see the deterioration, or the patient is, the survival rate is also becoming less as they go higher and higher. This shows the severity of the disease. Okay, as we all know, this is the nasal cannula. We can go up to 6 liters, and always FiO2. FiO2 means fractional inspired oxygen. This is calculated based on in the atmospheric air we have 21% of oxygen, and each of the 1 liter which we take, it will add 4% to it. So 1 liter if you give, patient gets 24. It goes on like that. And simple face mask can start from 5 to 10 liters. Non-rebreather mask can go for high flow, that is 10 to 15. And you all must be knowing about the Venturi mask, which is of different colors and different percentage of oxygen, and different liters of oxygen are also given in that. Now the current important practice which is introduced during COVID respiratory distress syndrome problem is high flow nasal cannula, which we have not seen usually in our practice. They have found it to be very useful, and the survival rate is very high, or the patient progressing to critical stage is prevented. A lot of studies have evidence to that. What is this high flow nasal cannula? It is just a cannula, but it should be bigger. It should be fixed continuously on the patient's cheek. And this machine can give up to 70 liters of oxygen. So they start 40 liters of oxygen, 60 and 70 liters of oxygen can be delivered to these patients, because we know there is no gas exchange which is properly taking place in the alveoli because of alveolar damage. We need to give them high oxygen intake. And it is passed through the humidifier. Humidifier is only to moisturize the air, but here you will find the temperature also is controlled. You can see 37 in the humidifier. So heated and moisturized air is sent, because very high concentration of oxygen is given through this. And if whatever we have seen so far is the conventional oxygen therapies, mask until high flow nasal oxygen. We'll move on to, if conventional management of oxygen is not useful, then we need to go into the non-invasive ventilation. So most of the time it is CPAP or BiPAP which is used. What is CPAP? It is continuous positive airway pressure, and BiPAP is bi-level positive airway pressure. Okay, just for your simple understanding, because there are different level of students, I'm just explaining it simply. Continuous, the machine looks like this. Okay, you can keep any mode in this, either CPAP or BiPAP mode in this. These are the latest machines which are available in the hospitals, the ICUs. So CPAP is continuous positive airway pressure. Irrespective of patient breathing, this machine gives continuously positive pressure so that more oxygen is reaching your alveoli. What is BiPAP machine? It has separate settings for inspiratory, we call it as IPAP, and expiratory, EPAP. Okay, if you see in this, I don't know whether it is clear for you, you can see in this machine, they have set it up, the usual setup is, inspiratory is 14. So the pressure is more when they are inspiring air, so they can take in more oxygen. And the expiration PAP is only 4. Okay, so the machine helps little in expiration also. That is what is called BiPAP, and this is what is used. And there is some automatic mode also, where it can identify whether patient needs inspiration or expiration pressure more, and it can adjust according to the patient's breathing. And to connect this to the patient, we need some interface. Interface means the things, what we are going to use it on the patient. So it could be the helmet or the oronasal belt. Okay, the oronasal belt is actually the common one which are available in all our hospitals, but there are a lot of disadvantages to it, because there can be some air leak and the virus can be in that room, around that room. And also the patient feels so claustrophobic that they are tightly fixed onto something and they are not comfortable. Sometimes they are not cooperative, they feel nauseated and all those things, and they cannot eat and drink or speak. All these are problems. So the current COVID protocol is the helmet which they are using, which is like this, and the patient has all the freedom to turn or talk or breathe, and it is connected to the machine. And one thing which we should remember, there are two recommendations for controlling the aerosolization around the patient, like the virus around the patient. One is the bacterial viral filters, which can be fixed to the exit of the port of this mask or in this helmet, you will find the filters which is filtering the virus, so it is not in the environment anymore. The other one is these patients can be treated in the negative pressure room so that the virus does not cross the room. So these precautions should be taken when these patients are on a non-invasive ventilation. Now, when non-invasive ventilation also is not very helpful, the patients are still in hypoxemia, then the final resort, we need to put them on mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation, I'm not going into detail because for your undergraduate level, this is too high. So mechanical ventilation, just through the ET tube, endotracheal tube is inserted, and they are connected to the machine. And we'll see what are the other things which they do on a patient who is on mechanical ventilation also. Okay, I want to introduce you to something called National NEWS. They call it as simple as NEWS. That is National Early Warning Score. This is widely used for COVID patients to understand the progress of their disease, like whether they are getting better or they are going into severity. So respiratory rate, you can see the score is given. If it is low, the high score is given if it is less than 8, and also high score is given if it is going above 25 also, okay? And their saturation, you can see when it is reducing to the 91, it is 3. Then whether they are on oxygen or no. Then systolic blood pressure, as we know that they all have septic shock. So it's very important to know the blood pressure. Hypotension is the biggest problem among them. And you can monitor the pulse. Pulse rate may be sometimes very high or very low. And ACVPU is usually we were using these scores in other patients also. It is alert, confusion, voice, pain, and unresponsive. So this score, and also the temperature. How much is the temperature of the patient? In septic shock, sometimes the temperature, especially in elderly people, there can be hypothermia also. So both are very significant based on these scores. If the scores are equal or above 3, then we treat them as critically ill and we need to do all other measures which are possible. And another definition I want you to understand, this is developed during this COVID time. It is acute respiratory distress syndrome. When do we call it as acute respiratory distress syndrome? Within a week of respiratory symptoms, the patient will go into severe condition. And the second one is the chest imaging, either CT scan or X-ray, shows bilateral opacities and collapse of alveoli, nodules are seen, consolidation is seen. And another one is edema. You find pulmonary edema. As I said, the alveoli are filled with the fluid. So we find pulmonary edema on these patients. It is not because of cardiac failure. And the fourth, these are the criteria to say that it is acute respiratory distress syndrome, and we can classify them based on something called PF ratio. I'll go to the next slide and come back to this. Okay, please understand what is PF ratio, which is very important. You would have learned it in adult MedSurg 1, MedSurg 2, when they were teaching about respiratory system. You should have been studying about this. Okay, what is this PF ratio? Because everywhere in the ICUs, when they are caring for critically ill COVID patients, all the care is based on PF ratio. So we should be knowing about it. What is PF ratio? P is PaO2, okay, the partial pressure of oxygen, which is there in the blood. So always it should be more than 80 or 100 it should be. And FiO2 is nothing but it is the fractional inspired oxygen, how much the patient is taking from the atmosphere or outside, you are giving oxygen therapy to them. All these things are called fractional inspired oxygen. So a normal PF ratio is more than 400. Please keep that in your mind. We are going to talk about it again and again. So the normal PF ratio is above 400. In a patient who's having acute respiratory distress syndrome, the PF ratio becomes less than 300. Okay, when do you say mild? When it is between 200 to 300, we call it as mild. When it is 100 to 200, we say moderate. When it is severe, the PF ratio becomes less than 100. Okay, so this is the criteria which is given to say what is ARDS, what is acute respiratory distress syndrome in COVID. And another problem we come across in COVID patients are the refractory hypoxemia. What is refractory hypoxemia? After you give mechanical ventilation also, some patients' hypoxemic levels are not improving. Okay, their PF ratio is still low. So we say that refractory hypoxemia, it is the patients who are not responding to conventional therapy. And the usual criteria, when do they say refractory hypoxemia? When their PaO2, okay, it is supposed to be 80, when it is less than 60 and PF ratio less than 100 and SpO2 less than 88, and they are on mechanical ventilator and their PEEP is positive and expiratory pressure, which is to prevent the alveoli. It is kept in more than 5 centimeter. With all these things, they are not able to maintain the normal saturation. That is what is called refractory hypoxemia. Now, what is called lung, I'll go about refractory hypoxemia in a few minutes. And lung protective ventilation in ARDS. What is a lung protective ventilation? These are all some of the settings which are there in the ventilators. I don't want to go into detail, but there are 3 things which you should know, which is very important. This protective lung strategy is also known as open lung approach. Okay, it is a standard care for management of patients with ARDS internationally. So what are they trying to do? The tidal volume for these patients are kept in a lower level. Okay, you know what is tidal volume? There is inspiratory tidal volume and expiratory tidal volume. The amount of air we breathe in, the amount of air we breathe out. Okay, it's around 500 ml for a normal person. So when you're setting in a machine, tidal volume is kept low. It is only 6 to 8 ml per kg we are keeping, and we are applying PEEP. What is PEEP? Positive end expiratory pressure. This is to prevent the collapse of the alveoli. Okay, the alveoli should be always open. Then only it can take in oxygen. It can exchange it with the blood vessel which is around it. So we don't have hypoxemia. And the plateau pressure, they maintain something called plateau pressure, which is less than 30 centimeter water. That is also the pressure which is maintained inside the alveoli are called plateau pressure. So these 3 are some criteria which is followed internationally. I just thought it will be useful for you to notice this. And we saw refractory hypoxemia. So we should do something about it. Even after putting the patient on mechanical ventilation, if the patient is not improving, what are we going to do next? So we can use neuromuscular blocking agent, prone positioning, recruitment maneuver, and inhaled nitric oxide, high frequency oscillatory ventilation, and ECMO. What is this neuromuscular blocking? Sometimes because the patient is trying to fight with the ventilator, that the ventilator is not able to support the patient well. So in such conditions, or maybe they have severe chest pain, so they need to be given sedation with some pain medications, like usually fentanyl is used, and they need to be, the neuromuscular blocking agents has to be given so that they are paralyzed, so that they don't fight against the ventilator. So the common drugs which we use are propofol and midazolam, which is almost like anesthetic drugs which are given to these patients, and we sedate them completely. It has its disadvantages. Sometimes the patient can go into paralysis of some part of the body, and when they recover, they have found that they had polyneuropathy, post-traumatic stress disorder, all these were problems, but we have to weigh benefit which is needed for the patient. The next thing is something called recruitment maneuver. I said about PEEP pressure. Okay, usually we keep 5 to 10 centimeter of water is the PEEP which is given so that the alveoli are kept open. Now, what do they do in this recruitment maneuver? For few minutes, they increase the PEEP up to 40. So you are trying to open the alveoli to a maximum so that more oxygen is taken inside. But it is sometimes very dangerous. The alveoli can rupture and there can be bleeding inside. It should be done by a properly trained person. It's not a very commonly used ones in these patients. And we saw about position changing when they are awake. Now we will see about the prone positioning for these patients who are already on mechanical ventilation, they are on neuromuscular blocking agents, so they are sedated, they are unconscious. How this prone positioning is useful in them? Okay, in ARDS, okay, I want you to understand this small concept. The alveoli is there. The alveoli is receiving oxygen, and the blood vessels around the alveoli are going to take up that oxygen, and they are going to send carbon dioxide, which should be exhaled outside. This is the normal respiration. But there is imbalance between the blood and the airflow in case of COVID patients. So when you put them in prone position, okay, when the patient is always there in supine position, what happens is the alveoli which are present in the posterior, you can see in the first picture, the alveoli which are present in the posterior part of the body, posterior part of the lungs, are compressed. So they are not able to have proper gas exchange. But the alveoli which are there in front are over distended because we are giving a lot of oxygen through mechanical ventilation, or it's filled with fluids. It's not very much functional. So what do? We are following this proning. Almost 12 to 16 hours, the patients are put on prone position. And so that you can see in the second picture, the dorsal, the back side of your body, the posterior part of the lungs, the alveoli are opened up. It is not compressed anymore. So they can do this function of ventilation very well. So this imbalance of airflow and the gas exchange is reduced. And they have found this to be the best modality to improve hypoxemia, to bring back the patient to better condition. And I have heard the story of many patients in our hospital also, that the patients who were put on prone position when they were on ventilators have recovered, and they were weaned from the ventilators, and they have become even very normal after that. So this seems to be an international benchmark which is set by Society of Critical Care Medicine. They recommend all these patients to be in prone position for 12 to 16 hours. You can see this position. It's not very easy to, I put this picture just to show you that it's not very easy to put them in prone position. You need at least 5 or 6 people around them so that the tubings and the ECG leads, everything should be carefully handled. And at least they should have a minimum of 3 pillows for the head, chest, and the legs. And this helps, again, one more point I forgot to say, this helps even in improving the secretion clearance. So all the secretions which are there in the base of the lungs can come towards the mouth and or in the upper respiratory tract, and it can be suctioned frequently. Okay, the other modality which is used commonly in COVID patients are inhaled pulmonary vasodilators. Okay, nitric oxide is the gas which they are using, and one more drug of prostaglandin category. But we need a specific anesthetic machine for this, and it's very costly. But they have found it to be opening up the vasodilating the normal alveoli which are still working properly. So there is better ventilation, perfusion, matching is found. But it's not very commonly used because of the costly the cost which we need to pay on this, and also the side effects it can cause on the patient. They develop something called methemoglobinemia, which is very dangerous for the patient. And this is also not commonly used in all the hospitals, but COVID time, whatever is the new thing which are used, I just wanted to introduce it to you. This is called high frequency oscillatory ventilation. And you know, this machine is connected to the endotracheal tube of the patient, and this can give high respiratory rate, high breaths, like more than 900 breaths per minute this machine can give. So just the basic thing is that more oxygen is given to the patient, and but they have done a lot of studies. Studies have not demonstrated any survival benefit. The patients have not survived. Many of them have died. So this has not become very famous. And the last resort, which when we cannot achieve anything else, then the last resort for COVID patient is ECMO. That is extra corporeal. Extra means outside, corporeal means body, membranous oxygenation. So this is exactly outside the body. From outside the body, it's a technique in which the blood is removed from the patient, okay, from a vein, and it is passed through this artificial lung, which is outside, that is the machine, and it is returned to the patient again. And COVID patient, there can be veno-venous or veno-arterial. The commonest one which is used for COVID patients are veno-venous only. The another problem is it's not there in many institutions, only institutions which are having operation theaters, cardiac surgeries where they use heart-lung machine. Only those people, they have ECMO. So it is not commonly present in all the settings. And also, but they have found it to be very useful, not for all the patients. There are some criteria for putting the patient in this ECMO. Like you have tried the patient on 7 days of mechanical ventilation, and they are young patients. They don't have significant comorbidities, and they don't have anticoagulation, any problem, like no bleeding disorders and everything, and they don't have any neurological dysfunction. Such patients are put on ECMO. There was a study which is done, because it's quite new, I thought of showing the evidence to you. There was a study done in 4 ECMO referral centers in large healthcare system. And these patients were almost on 17 days, okay, on this machine, and 57% of them survived to discharge. Okay, that's a very good news. Maybe in future we can think of promoting it in many centers also based on the study finding. And so those are the modalities. You can bring out the patient from refractory hypoxemia. And a few things I want to say related to our nursing care more at this point. Like the area where all these COVID patients are there in the ward, we are doing continuous suction, and the whole area is filled with aerosol. So we need to take care of us also. So hospitals can think of instituting this portable suction machine, which is recommended in UK and US and all that. So the virus is not there in the wall suction. There is no way of escaping, and this can be, the containers can be disposed once it is filled. So this is to contain the transmission of this virus to the healthcare workers. And another thing which is very important on these patients who are on ventilator, many hospitals have a VAP bundle, ventilator associated pneumonia, which is very common in any patients. So they have kept some bundle, how often they should give oral care, and oral care should be given with chlorhexidine mouthwash, and their position, unless they are in prone position, always put them in 30 to 45 degree head elevated Fowler's position. And we need to change the circuit of that whole circuit of the patient every 1 week, once in a week. If it's getting damaged or soiled in between, that should be removed, so that they will not get any other, because we are giving them a lot of steroids, we are giving them immunosuppression. They are very easy to develop other secondary infections, especially ventilator associated pneumonia is very common among them. And what is recommended is internationally to use closed suctioning system. In the Middle East, most of the hospitals are using this closed suctioning system. I hope you have seen, but I'm not going into detail of that. You can learn from your teachers. Closed suction system, the tube is inside a cover where you don't come in contact with that at all. Directly it goes to the suction when you are attaching it. It has a subglottic suction also. That yellow part is called subglottic suction. So whatever is there in the upper portion of the airway also can be sucked separately. So this is very useful in preventing VAP in COVID patients. And another biggest problem which we are coming across is the blood clots or the embolism, venous thromboembolism, VTE we call it. It is very common. Some of the micro circulation in lungs are blocked with these blood clots, and sometimes because the patient is not at all moving, it is there in the deep veins also. So this is our usual protocol for even patients who are undergoing surgeries, unconscious patient, we always use it. So those medications can be used here also. Antiplatelet drugs, anticoagulants as a prophylaxis, as I said, low molecular weight heparins can be used, and thrombolytic agents can be used. There is something called vena cava filters, which is not widely used, but this filter can be placed inside the inferior vena cava. So when the blood clot is coming near to the heart or the lungs, it can be filtering it. It will not allow it to enter. So the patient will not develop pulmonary embolism. And there is one more called, if you cannot use anticoagulants for the patient, supposing they have some bleeding disorder. So such patients, we can use something called intermittent pneumatic compression. We use it in our surgical wards here. This small machine, like a small belt, it is put around the patient's legs. It gives intermittent compression. Like it relaxes, it contracts, it relaxes, it contracts. So it is like moving your leg muscles continuously. So the patient will not have venous stasis or they will not develop any embolism. And the other nursing care to prevent other complications. See, they have found that these are all the international guidelines. So catheter-related bloodstream infections were very common among these patients. So as nurses, we can play a very great role in preventing these infections. So the small steps like hand hygiene, and when you're inserting the catheter, most of these patients are on central line catheters. So when you're inserting catheters, we have to be very careful in following skin antisepsis with chlorhexidine swabs are available, and checking it daily for any signs of infection. We always put the patient on transparent dressing so that we can observe. And here the hospitals, there are policies every 3 days IV lines are changed. If it is central line, they change it for every 1 week. So that it does not harbor any microorganisms. So catheter related infections are prevented because of this. And other important thing is, only you do a blood culture, then only you should start the patient on antibiotic. Without any evidence of bacterial infection, they should not be started on antibiotics because they can develop antibacterial resistance. And the third thing which is important here is, we need to take care of the stress ulcer, which they have found a lot of incidents of stress ulcer, gastrointestinal bleeding, because we are taking care of only respiratory system, heart, and which are all important. We should not forget about the nutritional needs of the patient. So only 1 day or 2 days, you can put the patient on IV fluids and other things. Then the patient should be started on enteral nutrition. Either if they are conscious, started through mouth, or you can put an nasogastric tube, or if both are not possible, they can be started on TPN also. Total parenteral nutrition can be started for them. And we know the gastric acid is continuously secreting, and if you don't give food, these acid are going to eat up the gastric mucosa. So as we all know, how to prevent gastric ulcer, we need to give proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole or pantoprazole or ranitidine, histamine 2 receptor blockers should be given so that the acidity of the stomach is reduced. And the other, of course, the last one, which is very important, the skin. So we need to reduce the incidence of pressure ulcers, lot of tubings, and the patient is in prone position for 12 to 16 hours. And so if possible, try to turn the patient every 2 hours and give them adequate supporting devices like pillow or some towel or sheet under the bony prominences. And we can use pressure reducing mattresses. And skin care is very important, back massage and back care and all that is very important. Adequate hydration and nutrition of the patient also helps in maintaining the skin integrity. And of course, we should take care of prevention of transmission of infection. We know how to donning of PPE, which is called putting on the PPE, and doffing means removing the PPE. Each has a role. And I read it in some article, in some countries, they are following a system of having a runner in the room where they are putting the PPE. What is the responsibility of this runner? See, she will be checking on every healthcare provider who's coming inside. It must be a doctor, or it must be a respiratory therapist, or occupational therapist, physiotherapist, or nurses, lab technician, who is coming inside the ICU. They have to wear this whole PPE, okay? Personal protective equipments. So this person who's a runner is supposed to check whether they are putting everything properly, whether they are correctly dressed up, any problem is there, okay? Then how they are removing it also they will check. And in other countries, if they are doing 8 hours of duty, they are asked to change their PPE after 4 hours. So two sets of PPE they use. I think in our country, we cannot afford to all these things, but they have, that's how they have reduced the incidence of COVID among the healthcare workers. We need to take care of the healthcare workers. If they are not there, who's going to take care of our patients? So we need, what is the other thing is, if they get tired, they are given 30 minutes of break and then they can use another set of PPE, and all those facilities are there in many countries. We should also think about it. And the nursing diagnosis, I'm not going one by one. There are many nursing diagnoses which you can write for these patients. I just took a sample of one, and it is the ineffective breathing pattern which many of these patients will have. And how do we reduce their breathing difficulty within a particular time? And what are all the things we do? We assess and we position, then vital signs monitoring, and what all mechanical ventilation or whatever we are giving, all those things. Now, all interventions what we saw can be listed under this. And also the other possible diagnosis could be they have a lot of secretions. So ineffective airway clearance, you need to suction it out frequently, and impaired gas exchange. That's why we are monitoring for hypoxemia, ABG analysis, and saturation monitoring with pulse oximeter. All these becomes very important here. And also decreased cardiac output. We saw these patients are going into septic shock. They are going into hypotension. So how do we manage their decreased cardiac output? Then activity intolerance. Even if they are conscious, they are so tired, they are fatigued, they cannot do anything by themselves because the oxygen to the cells are not supplied, which is making them very tired. And anxiety of these people. Okay, I have heard of many stories of my own surroundings. Maybe in a bigger surrounding, it may be different. We saw in a lot of videos and all that how families are crying and how the same family members are admitted and they see in front of their eyes the husband is dying or the wife is dying. And so the anxiety level becomes higher and higher, whether I will survive or worrying about my own family who's not there. Okay, those areas we need to take care. And also self-care deficit. We need to take care of their daily self-care needs, their bath, their skin care, and the back massage, and some exercises can be given to them because to prevent positioning, to prevent VTE, we can thromboembolism, we need to take care of them. And you can write impaired physical mobility, impaired skin integrity, risk for infection because they are on immunosuppression drugs and corticosteroids. They can have hyperglycemia side effects. We need to monitor hyperglycemia. BP can go high. They are prone to other secondary infections. We heard about the black fungus, which is because of all these immunosuppression which are used in these patients. So we need to be carefully monitoring these patients as they are risk for infection, risk for injury, because sometimes they are confused, they are helpless, so they can fall. Always, you can see in this picture, the side rails are up. Always it should be up. We should be protecting them from any injuries. And also nutrition, we need to take care. They can develop constipation or diarrhea because the viruses can affect the intestine also. Then risk for aspiration because we are giving them neuromuscular blocking agents and they are unconscious. This can cause aspiration in them. And then many patients, knowledge deficit, because when they want to get discharged or when we are asking them to do something, see for example, the positioning. For every 30 minutes, they need to change the position, isn't it? So if you tell them, if you do this properly, you will not progress to ICU admission. Then they may be willing to do that procedure if they know the benefits of it. So health education becomes very important in these situations. And of course, we should not forget about the mental health of these people. We were taking care of all the physical and physiological needs, but even psychosocial care is very important. If they're already a mentally ill patient, then they have found out that people who are already mentally ill have progressed to severity of the disease very early. So we need to take care of that problem. And then you need to address the mental health needs of the vulnerable population, elderly people. They can easily go into depression. So giving them support is very important. And another biggest problem is the death of their near and dear ones. So we need to allow them to have the bereaving moment, to mourn about for their families. And another very important thing is the stigma. Whenever there is a person who is positive, nobody wants to talk to them, nobody wants to help them. So in which way they can help them, all those awareness should be created and stigma should be removed from our society. And There should be some counseling centers where these people can approach. If they have a lot of problems, they should be referred to. And okay, now that they are okay, they are getting discharged post-COVID care, you cannot say they are completely all right, because my own family, I have seen some of our relatives who are affected, and how they suffer for 2 months and 3 months. So I started reading some of the post-COVID problems. Many people have shared their experiences, and they have written many articles. It doesn't happen in one day. They need to continue caring for them, even at least for, they say that even 3 months. Some of them are depressed, and some of them are still weak. They cannot, they are confused. They have less concentration at work. So many problems are expressed. So advise them to have plenty of fluids, breathing exercises and meditation. Nutritious diet is very important. Adequate sleep is important. They should avoid smoking and alcohol. And of course, they should take COVID vaccine. Some people say in 1.5 months time, they can take the vaccine, but CDC recommends at least 3 months they should wait, and only they should take the COVID vaccine. Most of them can resume for work, 2 weeks of rest, and then they can resume for work. Now, what is this de-isolation criteria? When you can de-isolate them, like when they can mingle with others. If they were asymptomatic patient, so from the day of testing positive, after 14 days, they are normal. They don't spread it anymore. And mild cases, okay, you calculate from symptom onset. Okay, the symptoms when it started, from that day de-isolate them after 2 weeks or 14 days. Then severe cases, once they become clinically stable, the person who was there in ICU shifted to the ward, and then they are coming home because they don't have any problems. From there, isolate them for 14 days. Okay, this is the criteria which is given internationally for de-isolation. And COVID vaccines, currently there are 3 vaccines which are available: Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Sputnik. And each of them have some side effects, advantage and disadvantage. But it is better to take one of these vaccines so that we can live in a world where there is no corona infection. And this injection is given in the deltoid site. It is intramuscular. It's only 0.3 ml. AstraZeneca is only 0.3 ml, which is given into the muscle. And there are some side effects. There are, you will feel like that you have COVID symptom for 2-3 days, because I have taken the vaccine. That's why with my experience I'm saying. And but it is, after some time you are fine. If there is some problem to give it in deltoid site, the next option is vastus lateralis site, which is there in the thigh. And I would like to recommend about telehealth services. Like, we are only concentrating on COVID patients. We are forgetting about all the other chronic disease patients who needs consultation, who needs medications for their chronic conditions. So we can think of health services in this situation, and also tele-triage for COVID patients. So unless there is a need, they need not come to the hospital. So they need not spread the infection on their way and to the healthcare workers. And also some therapies like physiotherapy, occupational therapy, all that can be done through telehealth services. And okay, taking care of the patient, we should not forget about the caring for the caregivers. We need to, I think the governments all around the world are doing some special things for the people who are there in the front line. The healthcare providers' salaries are increased for some people. We need to take care of the mental health. So they have kept some supporting centers, counseling centers. Sometimes they are burnout, looking at the number of deaths and the sufferings of the people. So they need some counseling, they need some rest. There should be rotation of their duties. Not one person is continuously there in the critically ill area. Like that, there are so many things which are taken care all around the world, and we also should not forget about it. And I think this picture, all of you know, it is there in the WhatsApp. We know the giants of this world, which we see in the cartoon picture, Superman and Iron Man and all these people. In fighting with the COVID, our healthcare workers in the front line should be saluted by even these giants. That is what this picture says. These are my references. And thank you. The world is still learning to fight with COVID pandemic. There are a lot of evidences which are coming up, a lot of researches which are done. Today they are saying this is effective. Tomorrow with the study finding, they are saying something else is better. So the world is still learning to fight with COVID pandemic. It is our responsibility to update our knowledge of evidence and the research which are happening around, or what is happening in the hospitals. We need to update ourselves. Then only we can keep up with the pace of this. I hope there is, it's clear. I hope it's clear. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, ma'am. Excellent and awesome presentation. I
Thank
think
you.
a lot of new informations. I think MedSurg people would have been benefited more. Certain areas I think it is too much advanced, more advanced. I think you have taken lots of efforts.
Thank you.
Doing such a wonderful content. You have what to say, lot of things were I was observing actually your awesome presentation, the slow and steady way of presentation. Actually, Jayanti was telling, I told you yesterday itself.
Yes.
What that was true actually. I was able to get it now. Really, it is amazing the way you presented your content slowly. What to say, simple to complex way. Really, all the teaching learning principles, like it's excellent. Especially, we came to know certain new things also about that news and your all the artificial. Ma'am, I have one doubt actually.
Yes.
This is actually related to oxygen. Oxygen. Is there any concept like oxygen auditing? Something is there? No. Is it a new trend or is this in practice? Or any
Oxygen auditing.
auditing? Yes. Is there
I
any?
have only heard about that escalation. Maybe it is similar to that, like how they are advancing from low level oxygen to high flow oxygen, then non-invasive and invasive. That must be the auditing, because they have criteria for every step. Like they are looking at the PF ratio, SpO2, ABG analysis is continuously monitored, and they even see the they are calling it as working out of the respiration. Like the simple thing which we have learned in first year, the use of sternocleidomastoid muscle, accessory muscles for breathing, even that is a criteria for putting the patient in mechanical ventilation. With all the efforts, if the patient still has that problem, that is the first identity, it seems, to put the patient in mechanical ventilation. Maybe that is called oxygen auditing. I'm not familiar with that word.
And one more thing also, ma'am. Suppose the patient needs actually, suppose his saturation is around, it is less than just 90, 89, 85 means we may need around 2 liters of oxygen. Yes,
Yeah, but
because
that is the normal situation, ma'am.
normal situation.
No,
Suppose
COVID
the
patient.
COVID patient, you need more. Suppose the
Yes.
patient's saturation level is very low. Actually, it is around 70. That means he may need around 10 to 15 liters of oxygen also. Yes, ma'am?
No, below 85 itself, mechanical ventilation. They don't wait for oxygen at all. Even this 85 to 93 is high flow nasal oxygen. I don't know, I have not seen in my practice time at all that high flow oxygen, which is giving 70 liters. 15 liters itself, we can hear the sound of that oxygen too much in the ward. And this 70 liters is a great advancement. If that is also failing, they don't allow the patient to go beyond 85, because brain function will be impaired. They may go into coma, they will never be coming back of it. So it's better to stop at that stage. Mechanical ventilation, most of them die if they go to that lower levels and all, ma'am. Like as I said about refractory hypoxemia, if they are not improving with any of these things, death is fine. That is what is the COVID protocol.
Okay. So, is there any technology or techniques available to maximum utilization, like how we follow management principles, no, with minimum efforts, maximum benefits, like that? Is there any technology for the oxygen to increase the oxygen saturation level with minimum amount of oxygen? Is there anything available?
Okay, ma'am. Like this, I was also reading some articles on this. Actually, the high flow nasal oxygen became very famous in between. Like even my colleagues' parents were put on that. Maybe I can say 8 months back. In the beginning days of COVID, it was becoming very famous. Then we know the shortage of oxygen which came in between all around the world. So there they started reducing the use of some of those things which I said. HFNC or HFNO, and the other one, oscillatory one, all that, because there is a lot of wastage of oxygen. Patients are dying, but oxygen also is getting wasted. So they are now very carefully thinking about it, whether we need to use such high flow oxygen or directly go for non-invasive or invasive mechanical ventilation. I attended a lecture from CMC. Some doctors were presenting about it. So they were saying they are not for high flow nasal oxygen at all. They go directly, if the patient is not maintaining saturation, to NIV, or they go into invasive mechanical ventilation. Other than that, that proning helps, ma'am, now. Proning is the best thing which they are using, which is improving the oxygenation. And the other maneuvers like increasing the PEEP, those things, you don't need to waste oxygen just by giving high flow oxygens. Those are the techniques.
This indigenous system of medicine, they say this crambu, keeping that also increases the oxygenation well.
Yes, ma'am. Even methylene blue they are using, which is it seems it's a 1,000-year medication. Methylene blue, which is given respiratory, and some other medications, homeo and other medications are also. They are saying try all that for mild cases. Even ICMR is recommending that. You can try all the indigenous medicines for very mild cases, so that they won't progress to. And one happy thing is 80% of the patient are in mild stage only. Currently, only 5% of them are critically ill, and even the critical fatal rate all around the world is 5%. So we should try to bring it to 0. That should be our aim.
Okay. Thank you so much. Any other students or faculty, please, if you have any clarifications, you can. No, I think I have taken a lot of. Yes, medical surgery.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a crystal clear presentation. Always I used to wonder about your presentation, and I'm very proud to say that I'm your student. Really approved. Yes, thank you, ma'am. I must mention, see, ma'am, நிறைய பேர் ரோல் மாடல் இருப்பாங்க. இந்த ஸ்பார்க், தி மெட்சர்ச் படிக்கணும், அந்த பேத்தோபிசியாலஜினா இப்படிதான் படிக்கணும் அப்படின்ற ஸ்பார்க் வந்து நான் மேம் கிட்ட இருந்து தான் கத்துக்கிட்டேன். So she has taught me about cirrhosis of liver. I never forget the lecture madam was taught to us on that day. So I used to wonder about your presentation always. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear.